Well, welcome everyone to Outer's May webinar on auCheck. I'm Michael Lewis, Outer's Industry Relations Manager. I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land of which I'm coming to you from today, the original home of the Bunurong peoples of the Kulin Nation. I'd like to pay my respects to elders, past, present, and emerging. Please note today's session is being recorded. As we discussed in our last webinar, maintaining trust and security in the .au domain is a key focus area of Outers. Our strict licensing rules, set strict criteria for the eligibility in the .au namespace, which importantly require validation of registrant's information. Our high standards of compliance with the rules helps us maintain significantly lower rates of abuse in the .au than global average. This means fewer reports of phishing, malware, spam, and botnet attacks related to .au domains. The Internet Corporation of Assigned Names and Numbers consistently reports that rates of abuse in .au are around 1/10 of global TLD averages. But the abuse that we do see is mostly related to compromised websites. These websites are often exploited without the owner's knowledge, and are used to create sites that host malicious content and send out spam. I'm sure we've all received those typo-ridden text messages saying our delivery's been delayed, or that we have voicemail with some odd-looking URL, and a lot of those are these compromised sites. The result can be significant reputational damage to business, and it can also result in domains being blocked by spam filters, preventing businesses from reaching legitimate customers. It can also result in significant financial harm to customers and consumers as a result of financial scams for those who click on these links. To help uplift the levels of cybersecurity by business, Outer has supported a project with the Australian Strategic Policy Institute, ASPI, to develop a tool called auCheck, which is what we're here to talk about today. And to explain more about the tool and its development, we're joined by Bart Hogeveen, who's the head of the cyber capacity building at the International Cyber Policy Centre with ASPI. I'll ask Bart to touch a bit more on his background and that long and impressive title shortly. But Bart has a career focused on international peace and security, international aid and national security aspects of cyber affairs. As always, during and after the presentation, please use the Zoom Q&A function to post your questions, and we'll get to as many as we can towards the end. But first, Bart, I'll hand over to you. Welcome.
Thanks, Michael, and thanks everyone for joining. It's a real pleasure to after a long time to be able to share and talk about auCheck. So thank you all for tuning in and for your interest in learning more about this very exciting project and the auCheck tool that we launched not too long ago. Let me also try to share my screen, and I think it should all be good. So auCheck. So what I'm gonna brief you on and demo is a tool that we launched last month, and kind of our main headline is, "Are your internet services up to date?" Let us check and help. But let me first give you a bit of perspective of where this came from and the role we play at the Australian Strategic Policy Institute here based in Canberra as a national policy think tank. Just to put a few things up front, as Mike already hinted at, lots of abbreviations and complicated long titles, but ASPI is an independent and non-partisan think tank established back in 2001, and our main mandate is to provide the Australian government with fresh ideas on defence, security and strategic policy choices. So what does this mean in practice? It means that we are doing research, original and empirical research, to give different sources of information to the Australian environment. So that means engaging indeed with government officials here in Canberra, in the different state and territories, but also with the media and the wider public audience. It also means that we are very keen to bring government together with industry, civil society, and other professional communities like the communities represented here today on this webinar. And one area that I'm mostly involved in is that of capacity building support. So actually helping public policy to move ahead and to provide tangible and valuable resources to the community. That is taking place on a different, on a few different levels. That's taking place internationally, where we are engaged in international debates about safety and security in cyberspace. That means that we are contributing and helping out and assessing and sometimes criticizing national cybersecurity policies and investments. But also that means that we are very keen to engage at a local level. And I think when we talk about auCheck in this tool, it's very much that bottom-up local engagement that we're trying to boost and strengthen. And I think the common thread about in the work on auCheck and working locally, and I'll talk about it in a bit more about working with small and medium enterprises here in Australia and our international work, is that it's all about complying with or following international, national, and regional best practices, or it's sometimes called norms, and in other cases called technical standards. Technical standards is the topic that auCheck is tackling. Just to put things a little bit in context, I just putting up a picture or a diagram from the latest threat report that was published by the Australian Cybersecurity Centre late last year. And it shows you the number of incidents that were reported to the ACSC and the classification they attached to it. And I think you'll see that the bulk of incidents that have been reported involve low-level malicious attacks, such as targeted reconnaissance, phishing, and the loss of non-sensitive data, and also malware, temporary system and service disruptions in terms of the type of attacks or the type of attack vectors. And if you look at those mostly affected and targeted, these are medium-sized organizations, the SME business community in Australia, schools, state government, academia, research and development. In other words, all those who kind of operate in kind of the soft side of the economy where cybersecurity may not be kind of their prime concern. Now, what we tried to do through this project, with great support from AUDA over the last 2 to 3 years, is try to see what do we see happening kind of in the international environment. And that's where we came across 2 initiatives back in Europe, one by the UK National Cybersecurity Centre, I'll touch upon that in a minute, and one by a platform called the Dutch Internet Standards Platform, who developed the Internet.nl tool. That goes back a couple of years now, and back in 2019, they were so kind to make their tool available as an open resource, as an open source package, and allowed others in other economies in the world to take advantage of that and to kind of tailor that to their domestic context. And that's where we are with auCheck here in Australia. There are other examples in Latin America, in Europe and Asia. And I think the gist of auCheck is really to not do the most sophisticated and most advanced things, or to look at how to protect the Australian economy, critical sectors of the Australian economy. That's a whole kind of different area to work in. And that's also where, according to the Australian cybersecurity strategy that was launched last year, where government sees a role for itself. Now, we're looking mostly at those who kind of fall between, let's say, bigger companies who can kind of source their own cybersecurity and Joe Average. It's kind of that middle ground that we try to address here, because that's based on the statistics that you see on the slide, is where most incidents are being reported. And it's also looking at helping boost resilience against the low-level malicious attacks. So the simple things done well. And I think that's a quote that the technical director of the UK National Cybersecurity Centre very eloquently put a couple of years ago. It's about doing simple things at scale, which can have a positive and measurable effect. And in the UK situation, that all had to do with the active cyber defense program that I launched at the time. And I think this also ties to the vision that was promoted in the Australian cybersecurity strategy, which said that We want a more secure online world for Australians, their businesses, and the essential services upon we rely. So that's a bit of context where we're coming from. So what is it that we're looking at specifically? As I mentioned, the tool that we took reference from and for which we use the source code, it's called internet.nl. Over the course of the past couple of years, they looked at a number of internationally agreed, internationally recognized technical standards that are not necessarily security standards per se, but definitely have a security impact. So these are the standard families that we're looking at. Standards around secure website connection. So whether you have an HTTPS secure connection, which is encrypted and where this certificate matches with the domain. We're looking at domain name security, or the security extension of the DNS, which is a very interesting story here in the Australian context. We're looking at website or application security options. And for email, we're looking at similar things like the encryption of the email transport, as well as protection marks against phishing. As I mentioned, phishing was one of the main vectors that's affecting, let's say, us as individual citizens and smaller businesses. Now, the interesting thing is we consulted quite extensively before COVID with community stakeholder groups across Australia, running consultations in the various capitals. And you see people debating whether one is more important than the other, and why should we do this and why should we invest in this? But surprisingly, I think all the standards that are listed on the left-hand side, you'll find also in the Australian Government Information Security Manual. And although that's particularly targeted to the information security for the Australian federal government, it does serve as a kind of probably one of the few recognized sources of advice coming from government at this point in time. The only thing is that the security manual doesn't say whether something is super critical, important, or just recommended. But then again, this is, I think, what constitutes at the moment international good practice. It's not just, I think, something hypothetical, it is real and happening. We still see quite a number of websites, also websites of federal government agencies that do not enforce the use of an encrypted connection through HTTPS, where you see the not secure popping up in the browser. We see talk about DNS hijacking and the adoption of protection marks against phishing. So, for instance, the DMARC references that you see on your screen. So even though it's not, let's say, an everyday news headline, it is popping up even on the news every now and then, and definitely in the more kind of dedicated cybersecurity magazines and discussions, it's popping up very regularly. So that led us to the question, what can we do based on the tool that we saw being introduced elsewhere? What can we do to offer the community incentives for a greater take-up of these best practice internet standards? Because if you look at the standards that I showed on the previous slide, it is quite surprising that Australia generally, so the .au domain, is kind of lagging other similar economies or even smaller economies. And this is quite an interesting question to pose ourselves. Why is that? Why is there potentially a bit of hesitance or reticence to take up these generally acknowledged best practice internet standards? More substantially, what can we do to offer users and non-technical buyers of services a means to have an informed conversation with providers? I mean, in absence of a tool like this, me personally, I would have no means to have a discussion with my internet service provider or my hosting provider to say, this is what I want from you, and this is kind of the basic minimum that I expect you to deliver against. So hopefully this tool gives you kind of a baseline of information that helps to have an informed discussion with your hosting provider, your registrar, or whoever else is providing your internet services. And thirdly, we ask ourselves, what can we do to promote good performance, and how can we encourage others to do better or even better? So that's kind of as in terms of kind of why we got to this and what we intended to do. So now let's go to the the website and show you what it looks like and how it works. I do have to say here, performance of the website is not yet at its best or super robust, so it should work normally with normal usage, but please don't jump on it with multiple URLs at the very same time, because that might cause the website to temporarily have a bit of a challenge. But anyway, this is your landing website, and you can see the 4 main tests that we offer here. I think the main ones are the website and email tests. But then we also have a test that tests your connection, whether your connection is, so your actual connection is applying the standards, and there is a content management system test, whether your CMS system on your website is up to date.
But I think you might need to switch the screens unless you're still talking to the slide yet.
Sorry, yep.
We still see the PowerPoint, so there we go, all good.
Yeah, sorry about that. So the 4 main tests, right? So website, email, connection, and your content management system. Then we have obviously a news section, and we also are referring people to other free services that if you are concerned about your internet security, you should definitely take a look at and potentially subscribe to, which is the alert service from the ACSC, ScanWatch, and have I been pwned, which lists all the publicly known data breaches. We also offer some advice. So here are some questions that we raised and where we give some hints in terms of where to look for additional information. How do I know what I need to know? What can I do myself? How have others gone about this? As well as who should I contact to remedy any shortcomings? That said, we are a bit limited here because we don't want to say, let's say, these providers are good ones and others may be less good. So obviously we take a service neutral approach here and don't prioritize some providers over others. We also provide, I'll touch upon that in a second, some further details about the standards that I talked about for the more technology interested folks around. So if you go to the homepage, you can simply add the URL or the domain name you want to test here for website, for email, connection, or your CMS. There is a terms of use box to be checked here. So if I will be running the test for my own organization's website, which is sp.org, this is .au. This is what you'll find. What we've done here is that we wanted to kind of give an encouraging message. So there is a number of statuses that websites are being provided with. The least one is you need to take action now, going through, getting there, doing well, and you're doing great. And this is based on a prioritization of the different test results. So for instance, a secure encrypted connection is much more important than when you have Internet Protocol version 6 implemented. It's important, it's nice to have, but based on our prioritization, that's kind of weighted less. In that same vein, DNS security, so the adoption of the DNSSEC protocol is something that is widely encouraged, definitely globally, and I think here also in the region. But at the same time, it's not widely on offer here in Australia, so it would be unfair to judge websites on that. Although we do say that it's obviously, I mean, in most cases, failing the DNSSEC test. But it's not affecting your score at the moment simply because it's not a fair request to be made at this time. But through this, we hope that we can encourage greater adoption. Then here on the right-hand side, you see an aggregate score of all the tests that have been run so far, and hopefully over time that gives us a nice idea of what I would call kind of the health of the .au domain. So you find here the 4 main test categories. So this is HTTPS, about the encryption and authenticity of the web server, security of application, security of the domain name, and the adoption of the Internet Protocol version 6. This gives you an overall idea. And for the things to check, these are all the kind of sub-tests, the more particular tests that have failed or which have not resulted in a pass. This is not to say that that is something bad or super concerning. It's just something to look into and to consider for further reference or for further work. As I mentioned, the main audience we hope to reach here is the non-technical audience, those organizations or individuals that don't have the IT security skills or knowledge or resources, but do want to have an informed opinion about what's their current level of service offering they're getting. And that's why we kind of stripped the initial pages from all the technical language so that it is evident and transparent and accessible for anyone to understand why it is important to have a secure connection through HTTPS and everything that comes with it, and why it is important to have security options on your website enabled. Only if you drill further down into the test results, you'll see the different kind of sub-tests that we run. And you can precisely see where you pass, where you don't pass, but where it's not a major concern. So for instance, this one for the application of the HSTS protocol. But there are also things that are definitely of concern. And this one has to do with whether you have an up-to-date method of encryption at the moment applied. And if you are really interested in kind of the technical details, you can go in there and find what we have exactly found. So for instance, these are the IP addresses that the test checks against, and these are the affected cryptographic keys that have been identified. Now, without going too much further into the weeds now, if you have the test result as kind of a small business and you say, hey, I want my service provider to take some action, then there is a simple email the test result box, which allows you to, I won't do this right now, sorry, that pops up a draft email which allow you to send the test results to whoever you want it to be sent to. So that's kind of obviously what the site does. Things will change over time. Guidance from the ACS. Just the other point I want to refer to is that every subtest which you find here has a reference to the source of information, and in, let's say, 90% of the cases, that is the Australian Government Information Security Manual that I mentioned before. And then it can also link through the actual technical resources or the technical instructions that are generally and publicly available. Another thing I should mention is that obviously auCheck doesn't test or penetrate any systems. It's looking just at the public records that are publicly available and checks whether those public records are there, whether they are correct, and whether they're working correctly. So in that sense, it's obviously a first step to get an idea of the security service offerings you're getting. There might be good reasons why some things have been disabled or enabled, and there might be good reasons why some things are kind of hidden behind another service provider, which no test without penetrating the systems will not be able to show you. But at least that's something to be discussed, and that at least as a user and as a client, you should be aware of, and that information should be provided by the service provider. So that's kind of the tool. I see a number of questions popping in, so I will try to wrap up here. I will shortly go back to my PowerPoint slide and wrap up with kind of a bit of kind of forward-looking observation. So what do we hope to see? What do we hope to? How do we hope auCheck will be used in the foreseeable future? So 4 things. We hope that Australian smaller businesses will use the tool, and which hopefully will help them determine the extent of their internet service requirements. We hope that kind of the community of ISPs, network operators, hosting providers will take auCheck as a reference, and obviously we will do that through our promotion and outreach and engagement. Thirdly, as I mentioned before, we hope that the data we gather through the use of the tool will give us a better cross-economy perspective of what's the health status of the .eu domain, even though auCheck is not limited or restricted to .eu domain names in terms of use. And finally, we hope that this also encourages leading agencies and organizations to step forward and start leading by example and saying, for instance, we tick all the boxes of auCheck and we're fully compliant with auCheck, maybe as a first step. Yeah, we'll see in months and maybe a year from now to what extent we will be able to say that has been successful and that there has been an uptake as well. That leads me to the end of this kind of presentation and short demo. I am very interested to hear the questions, comments, and suggestions, and if ever you want to reach out, that's the email address as well as the Twitter handle. So feel free to touch base now and in the future. Back to you, Mike.
Thanks for that, Bart, and appreciate you going through that and giving the demonstration. And if people are going through it and they find any bits and pieces of feedback for Bart, whether they be anything for queries on tests or typos alike, please feel free to shoot him through. I know that he's been very responsive with picking up on those things. So thank you for that. Look, Bart, I might just sort of jump in with a broad question that we've had come in about the tool. And particularly sort of, well, how do we think people will use it? What do you envisage as average Joe user coming in and using the tool, and what do you think their journey will be in terms of progressing to a resolution as well?
Yeah, great. So I mean, as I mentioned, the main audience would be to help the smaller and medium enterprises here in Australia. So I think if you would, and we've been kind of doing a bit of playing around with it, but if you check websites of smaller companies, and especially those, let's say, during the pandemic who went online, you see that there are still loads who are missing some critical aspects of it, whether that's got to do with the encryption or the specific types of encryption they're using for secure communication. So whether that's me as a user visiting a website or enter my payment details into an e-basket. So hopefully, by using this website, owners of website domains and websites and email clients will get aware of how they're performing, and hopefully in most cases that's good, and definitely in most cases good enough for the type of activities they're running through their website or through their email domain. But if that's not the case, then this gives you, let's say, a first hint that entering into a conversation with your provider and saying, I'm concerned about ABC, and I would like you to look into ABC, and maybe we can remedy that, or look for a different level of service offerings. And you've
quite purposely laid the text in the tool as well, haven't you, to give a very high level overview, and then you could drill quite far down. I don't know if you did it in all the way down in those demonstrations you had before, but you can get you've got even right down to the code in there, don't you, that the queries have been run. How far down do you go for the technical audience?
Well, for the technical audience, we go as far as I demonstrated with that one I think test I showed for instance for HSTS, where we kind of present the public record that the test has been able to provide. So that mostly involves the IP address, whether it's IPv4 or 6, and in this case, whether a policy record has been found or not, or whether certain criteria for that record are in line with the recommendations or failing the recommendations. And in other areas, as I think I showed before, whether the cryptographic keys are in the list of to be used, are being phased out or are considered insecure. So that's the level of kind of technical details and technical specifics that we present through this tool. Obviously, again, it's all kind of the public records that we are comfortable with sharing and exposing as well. So we really consider this kind of as a first step at things. And then it's referring further to the actual kind of source documents. And then I think it's on the other end, let's say the back end for the provider to look into it from their end and see whether it matches or whether there are just configuration issues or something is really missing.
And we had a question coming from Hamilton about the HTTPS checks, and he's saying he's run a test on his website and he has the HTTPS, but it's flagging some issues. I know that's something we did touch on as well, as to what the site can see and can't see, but it's obviously not a it's not 100% as well. That there are a few external providers that might be providing the service, but the test might not pick up on. Do you have anything more to say on that as to common issues we're seeing?
I think not so much for HTTPS. I think on a few other occasions, some features that we would like to see enabled are behind kind of a Cloudflare or another provider, which the tool simply can't pick up. So, I mean, to answer Hamilton's question, I mean, I would have to know, let's say, which domain he's checking. But generally, as I mentioned before, the tool is checking what's there on the public records, and kind of that's made up of dozens of public record repositories. So if the tool doesn't pick it up, that means that something in the so if the assumption is right that HTTPS is there and it's failing the test, then it could be that in the configuration or in the public records there is either a misfit or a misconfiguration. Again, this shouldn't be necessarily a major issue. It could be simply kind of running a check and maybe correcting something. Does that answer the question?
I think so, yes. He didn't provide the specific domain, but it sounds like it could be a similar issue to what you've discussed, and I'd encourage him to get in touch with you directly if there does have any specific queries. But just on to another point, Bart, you were touching on InternetNL.nl that the tool was based on. Are you able to go a bit more into the journey that they had in developing the tool and how it's actually been implemented over there?
Yeah, absolutely. So Internet.nl goes back, I think, a couple of years, I think about 5 years, which really started as a community initiative of kind of the non-commercial internet technical community. So the likes of the National Cybersecurity Center, but also Internet Society, our as equivalent in the Netherlands, and a few others, where they recognized that the uptake of technical standards, which is so kind of originating from the technical community, is facing really a lack of take up by the commercial providers, and so they were thinking about ways how to encourage the uptake, exactly like we were doing as well. So they got together in, I mean, maybe a typical Dutch way, but in a platform, just say a working group, where they would sit together and discuss these things, but also that's where they came up with the idea of the test tool that we were demoing at the moment. The good thing there is, which is very different from the situation here, is that there was kind of a multi-stakeholder group of people supporting this, whereas at the moment this has been, despite our best efforts, initiatives of Ada and ourselves, and hopefully in the future we can expand kind of the group of friends behind this. But most importantly, they got the federal government to kind of embrace the tool and the standards that underpin it, and mandate that for all federal government websites. So at some point, the government standards organization which is similar, but again, not the same as Standards Australia, mandated all government agencies, federal government agencies, to be 100% compliant with the tests tool. And that obviously kind of generated the whole kind of push for greater uptake, and also kind of brought about this idea of leading by example. If you want to promote something, you should lead yourself first and foremost. They also use the tool to check and measure over time what the uptake of the standards, how that developed. So they did a kind of an annual bulk test of random domains representative of the economy. And there you could also see a more gradual uptake over time. But I think the bigger thing was really kind of the awareness campaign. So the Internet.nl and the standards platform kind of sparked off different initiatives, engaging at conferences of the small business community and speaking at events, and talking about how to secure your email, which is still kind of the major source of compromises. So it kind of created a momentum to talk about these things. And in the end, that also convinced the bigger telcos to come on board and to start having a conversation how they, as the main suppliers and the main providers, could become compliant with the standards.
Yes, and I think that small business audience is a particularly important one to get in on. But there are quite a few of them out there, but hopefully we can reach as many as we can. I know that our CEO Rosemary Sinclair was out there on the day of launch at the COSBOA, the Council of Small Business Organisations conference, talking about the tool. And I know there was quite a strong reception in the audience there. So there's definitely a demand, because a lot of what we see and hear in our own research too, including the Outers research last year on the digital lives of Australians, was that people are seeking people can't identify a specific source of cybersecurity information that they trust. They tend to Google things or ask friends. And in addition, we found that businesses were lacking in internal cybersecurity expertise, particularly the small businesses. So it's hopeful that this tool can provide them with an easy way to uplift that and identify the key target areas for them. So hopefully we can keep talking about that going forward. But that does bring me to another question, Bart, about what consultation ASPI did on the journey for this. I know you said it has been in terms of a multi-stakeholder environment that Outer particularly likes to operate in with the internet community. We have been engaging quite widely with players talking about this tool in the lead up to launch. Did you get much feedback from them going forward and since launch?
Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, in terms of who we consulted, it's I think a fairly diverse group of stakeholders. So that includes, let's say, on the government side, the ACSC and the department, so the Australian Cybersecurity Centre, and their Uplift team, as well as the Department of Industry and the respective cybersecurity branches of the state and territory governments. On the industry side, obviously a bit more limited in scope, but we back in 2019 we ran a number of consultation sessions in both in Melbourne and in Sydney, where we had the likes of some of the banks, some of, let's say, Woolworths and Coles, and a couple of others, as well as representatives of kind of registrars, mail security providers, as well as the technical community. So Internet Australia, the Regional Internet Registry, AP Asia Pacific, APNIC, and whoever else has the expertise and the visibility on some of these standards. And many companies that are kind of in the cybersecurity and mail security and managed service provider business as well. And obviously, you get 1,000 different opinions about what to do. But generally, I think the agreement and consensus was that what the standards that we are checking against and kind of the resources that's underpinning those standards was broadly all right and in line with thinking. But obviously, organizations and people have different interests to advocate or deprioritize certain things.
Indeed, and it's a broad audience that we're hoping will use the tool too. So it always makes that casting the consultation net out nice and wide, very important too. So, but on that, we'll be happy to talk a lot about government, but it is a lot to do as well with what industry and what business can do too. And you mentioned earlier that sort of targeted at small businesses that might not have the internal skills themselves, and a lot of them will look to big business to solve the problem. So do you see that as being a key part of the solution?
Definitely. I think one thing obviously is that we want, let's say, individuals and smaller businesses to have and get the services that they need to, do their work and commerce and trade safely and securely. But secondly, in terms of kind of our public policy objective, is that we like to see a greater demand for services that have the whole suite of HTTPS standard enabled, that have a demand for instance, the DNS security protocol to be offered on the Australian market. So it's kind of creating this market demand, which makes it for this very diverse group of service providers commercially interesting to start offering those products and products with those standards enabled, while at the same time coming in from the top and making sure that there is a stronger and greater guidance, either from government or from leading industry leaders, that's kind of creating the push and the pull at the same time.
So, well, thank you for that, Bart. We're about out of time, but we appreciate all your feedback and input on that. And as we said, the website was the email address was auCheck@aspi.org.au, was it? That people send their feedback through. So thank you for that. Look, we'll move to wrap up now, and I'll just sort of close by flagging, as I always do, that we've always got more events on the horizon at Outer, and in fact for our Brisbane members in person tomorrow, we have a networking event at the River City Labs in Fortitude Valley. Places are still available, and you can register now via our website, where you can also sign up as a .au member if you're not already. So that event's tomorrow evening in Brisbane. Please keep an eye on our website for more upcoming events. Thank you again all for joining us. Thank you, Bart. And we look forward to hearing your feedback on the tool. Thank you very much. Have a good day.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Michael.